So if you're involved in training and learning design, and if you're not thinking mobile, look around your organization to find out who is, because they'll have your job soon. Another aspect to consider. Knowledge has come from being a product to being a process, and it requires different skills. A product is typically a book. A product is a journal entry, might be a formula, but a product is some type of knowledge that's hardened. Or as I like to say, a product is a process that someone has stopped. So I write a book, someone stops the process, I publish a book. Now it's become a product. Horrible thing with products is they're ineffective when things change quickly. They don't work very well when the underlying core of knowledge is changing at such a rapid pace that we're no longer able to keep up. So in the end, we end up having a significant challenge in our ability to make relevant decisions based on knowledge that hit a product stage when it should be a process stage. So as our knowledge becomes more and more fluid, we need different models of coping with knowledge rather than courses, because courses make products out of knowledge. Programs in universities make products out of knowledge. We need approaches that make and continue conversations as a function of the knowledge space. Many of us grew up in an era where we didn't have access to the knowledge that we needed. A doctor had access to information that we didn't have. A real estate agent had access to information that we didn't have. In religious environments, individuals had access to information that we didn't have. So essentially what happened is the few kept the many at their feet because they had the capacity to be a gatekeeper. Well, that's all changed. Today I can go to my doctor's office, and if I've got a rash in some particularly uncomfortable place, I can go into my doctor's office and I can say, these are my symptoms, this is what I think it is, I checked on WebMD and I'm pretty sure this is it, so you probably want to write me a prescription for this at this strength. Right? So that's information asymmetry. It's gone. It's not an issue for most of us anymore. What has happened, though, is that we have to move from knowledge abundance to coping in that knowledge space, because we don't need, most of us, I should say, don't need access to more knowledge. We need the ability to translate that abundance into some type of meaning, some type of practical action. One of the things that I strongly advocate is that we need to get comfortable with technology being a second brain for ourselves. And particularly in the space of pattern recognition. This is just a first generation, a very simple example. On your left-hand side, I believe it is, you'll see a Flickr tag cloud. Basically what happens, you go to Flickr, you put up your picture, you put a tag on it. A tag is how you describe it. So if it's a picture of I'm in Berlin, I tag it Berlin. And I throw it up onto Flickr. So in the end, everything that happens, the activities of millions of Flickr users can be boiled down to one tag cloud. Another example, what we've done at University of Manitoba, the Virtual Learning Commons. We use a notion of 43 things where we take a series of content elements and we allow learners to connect to each other based on a particular type of content. So this is an important distinction. Content becomes a conduit for conversation. And that's a critical element that our learning approaches have to acknowledge, because we are in that transition stage. We are in the jumping off point of moving toward a new model of learning and functioning. So courses and programs, they don't work excessively well. They have limitations. They work well for certain types of learning, learning that's stable, learning that's fairly static, it doesn't change too quickly. Courses work great for that. However, more and more of our knowledge takes a completely different shape. Our knowledge no longer takes the shape of structured and consistent. What I knew 3 years ago, if I was still making decisions based on that today, I'd be in a big problem. I'd have a huge issue to contend with. As Bill Gates has stated as well, even when our educational systems are working the way they're supposed to, they're not capable of meeting the needs of our learners today. So we need to think of new spaces, we need to think of new structures. Courses and programs are not the answer in complex, adaptive knowledge environments. One of the primary approaches is that of networks. Networks are critical. In fact, networks are something that we're familiar with in every aspect of our lives. For example, when the Human Genome Project unearthed that there was about 30,000 DNA structures, so to speak, rather than the 100,000 they anticipated, they were amazed that we only had about 30% more DNA structures than some worms did, as an example. So it was tough to imagine how can we become this, and they're still eating dirt. So the essential perspective that came out of it was that DNA is a function of networks. DNA networks form and create certain models and structures which essentially creates human beings. So networks are everywhere, from our air travel to how we connect with other people, to our religious institutions, to family, to friends, to professional organizations. We are very network capable people. The problem is, networks have not been excessively explored from the softer science view, from the educational perspective. So we've largely left networks unattended to. The same holds true for ecologies. Ecologies are essentially the environment in which a network occurs. In my eyes, we can't talk learning networks if we're not talking learning and knowledge ecologies. Networks occur within something. Ecologies are the space that permit networks to flourish, to grow, and to be created. An ecology is essentially a chaotic, messy space. It's not an environment that we control, it's an environment that we foster. So then if we talk about networks, we have to increasingly start to see holistically, which means a network is valuable. It provides a certain aspect of the learning and knowledge process. Ecologies are valuable. They provide the space in which our networks will grow and flourish. But we have to think systemically. We have to see the whole. Too often I've seen organizations go 100% with an LMS, only 3 years later to go 100% away from an LMS. And in my perspective, both has a valid role if we first take time and we define our context. The determination of context of use for yourself, the learners, the technology, is the #1 way to make an e-learning or a learning technology strategy succeed. If we take the time to define our context, we essentially have the ability to successfully move forward. And that requires that we think in continuums and shades. We no longer see knowledge as an exclusive type of an approach where it's one way or another way, but we think holistically and we take the approach that's most relevant to what it is that we need to achieve. Consider this example here where we have numerous elements within the overall knowledge cycle or the learning cycle. We have everything from formal learning to game-based learnings to apprentice-based learning to self-reflection to where we have the value of performance support, informal learning, which Jay Cross will talk about tomorrow, and this huge network of multiple elements that create the overall learning and knowledge space. If we focus only on one, we're doing a disservice to ourselves, to our learners, and to our organizations. Finally, we need to move forward by fostering transformation. It's fairly well known that an organization that adapts too quickly is typically an organization that dies. We need a type of transformation that is in line with the nature of change, but not overreactive to change, and transformation that's reflective of continued spirit of experimentation. Any organization today in the learning and technology space needs to be heavily focused on thinking and reflecting on continued experimentation. It's the work of every training professional to be an active researcher and an active experimenter. These things won't happen just with a few individuals on the outside making those changes. So essentially, if we consider our organizations then, we're at a point where learning has become a thread that runs through our entire organization. It impacts everything that we do. The fabric of our organization, the fabric of our lives are essentially threaded with learning. In no regard can we take a view, the siloed model of learning that we've had in the past. We have a training department. We have a learning department. It's a ludicrous concept when you really think about it, because we're at a stage now with a complex knowledge landscape where learning is everyone's business. Knowing and understanding is something that shouldn't be reserved to a department, but it should be a function and the lifeblood of an entire organization. Thank you.